Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Our next presentation is Michael Horn. And, well, gosh, what can we say? Yeah, we're back to the Billy Meier case yet again. But you know what? It's still the most important case out there. It's still the case with the most hard, solid evidence. It's still the case with the most hard, solid information. It's still the case where the contactors are giving us absolutely time after time hard, verifiable, say it again, verifiable predictions of where we're going to go if we don't change the direction that we're headed. Yeah. It'll be controversial yet again, maybe more so than ever. I hope nobody brought, you guys didn't let anybody bring tomatoes in, did you? Buckle your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Horn.
Thank you, Bob. And in conclusion, right? Well, you may feel like that after a while. I'm just, Bob's warning about controversial. I guarantee you this will be controversial. First, for Terry, for Bob, and their family, we do this with a great deal of love. We're going to have a little different kind of a setup here. This is the first prologue, if you will. And this is for some special recognition for Lee and Britt elders. Many of you people who are familiar with the Meier case may know of them. You may not know them. They don't run around and make a lot of public presentations, probably none at this stage of the game. They have a background that's quite rich as professional electronic countermeasure specialists and private investigators, people who served to secure valuable, important data and facilities for Fortune 500 companies and banks, government offices. I'm going to just kind of reiterate what we have on the screen for those that can't read it, if you're far in the back. They have been, ever since they came forward with the Meier case, they were personally attacked, along with Meier, but they got more than their unfair share of attack, and largely from the UFO community, quote unquote, because Meier's photos and films and things like that were simply too good to be true, and it had to be a hoax, and they had to be in it for the money and what have you. Well, they persevered. They were forced to move. They had invested a lot of their own money in this. We have a long presentation. I'm going to try to make this not feel overly long, but the people that need to have some recognition, we're going to give it to them. And I know that everybody here knows Wendell Stevens. Most of us are probably not familiar personally with either Tom Welsh or Jim Delatosa or any of the other people that may have assisted and worked in the research investigation of this case. So also let me add, when I say that I've been researching the case for 28 years, I've been researching their work as well as all of the rest of the information, material, and people that have been available to me, going to Switzerland, interviewing people, etc. So we owe them a very large debt of gratitude, because without the work of Lee and Britt, Wendell, Tom, and Jim, this would never have come to the world. Okay? Now, I'm also going to do something I've never done before, because I am nearly 30 years into this, if you will. So this is a personal saga for me. There are things here that I want to just go through, and bear with me. You're going to see ultimately why I'm doing this part of it. So I'll try not to belabor it, and I will also try, here's a little aside. How many people here ever saw The Lord of the Rings, the last one? Like 3 hours long? Somebody invited me to that, and I nicknamed it the Budweiser Bladder Invitational. You just have to sit there and watch it. We're going to give you an intermission, so don't worry about that. Now, bear with me, and we're going to roll through this a little bit. In the early 1960s, I was an art student, I was a painter, I was winning prizes and selling my paintings and what have you. Shortly thereafter, I went to New York. I had an idea to miniaturize art and put paintings on fingernails. And to this day, people put paintings in fingernails because I started this silly fad of fingernail art. I moved on with my music in the 60s. In 1968, some friends and I wrote an animated projected cartoon series called Captain Tim and the Case of the Little Pollutions. It was all about air pollution. When I moved to LA with this script to sell it, I was told that nobody was interested in air pollution, so forget about the animated script. And here was a record called Captain Tim that I had produced in New York, and A&M put it out, and here was a major turning point in my life. Suddenly, I find the photo book put out by Lee and Britt and Wendell, the first coffee table-sized photo book on the Meier case. And this changed my life, and it probably changed everybody's lives. It didn't stop me from pursuing other interests. In 1985, I created an educational video technique called Future Self. In 86, however, the contact reports fell into my possession, and we'll have a little more talk about that later. In 87, I was doing New Age comedy, stand up and singing silly New Age songs, as is outlined here. In 88, I started to lecture on the case because also in 88, I had co-produced the Pleiadian Connection videotape with Randy Winters. And then I created something called Standing in Spirit in about 1990, which is the workshop that those of you who managed to endure the rest of this can participate in at the end of it. In 94, I was taken to Europe by this man who is a best-selling author, a consultant to the late Princess Diana. I helped to train European business and government leaders in my stress release and internal meditation process. In 94, I pioneered applications of water purification for Starbucks coffee. In 95, I created probably the first e-books on the internet. We called it e-books. And in 97, I was into issues of Inside Kung Fu magazine doing advanced strength and flexibility Qigong exercises. In 99, and this will be important again later, is the first article I wrote for UFO magazine on the Meier case. In 2002, I made my first presentation of the Meier case, because in 95, I was at these conventions doing New Age comedy, etc. In 2003, I put out the 2 Sit and Get Fit tapes that I created, Regenerative Movement. I was teaching at hospitals and for senior facilities, which I still do to this day. In 2004, the Meier Contacts, which I now call a collector's item because it has information on it that was published before the events occurred. And in 2004, I also put out another music CD. Okay, moving right along, this is the workshop in Standing in Spirit, another packaging of the videos I've done. In 2007, more publications, and now here, The Silent Revolution of Truth, which is a new film that we're producing on the Meier case that's coming out. And again, if you bear with us, I don't mean that I have a split personality. I mean, if we all stay here together, you'll see a clip from that film. Now, of course, all these other things that I do, can do, still do. Why am I doing the Meier case? Because, as it says here, it's either the biggest, most impenetrable hoax or the most important story in all of human history. But for decades, we've been told that these are hoaxes, that these are simply clever fabrications by a one-armed Swiss farmer. But could the skeptics prove it? And there have been plenty of them in the past 30-plus years. So, the beginning of the skeptical challenge, that was 2001, and I'm here to announce that the contestants are dropping like flies. One of these skeptics hosts a very religious website, and he said, "I'd love to be a fly on the wall on Judgment Day." And I wrote him back and I said, "Be careful what you ask for, because there are Fliegenklatschers around." And that's Billy Meier in one of his pastimes in the Freihof in Schmidt-Rudi, having his coffee and killing flies because they're just everywhere. And there's nothing wrong with killing flies. They carry diseases. Okay. So let's get back to the challenge. In 2001, an organization called CFI West, IIG, told me that Meier's photos and films were an easily duplicated hoax, and that it would be no problem for the case investigator at the time to duplicate one of the photos and one of the films. That's all I asked for. 3 years later, they failed to do so. All they could do was come up with a few little photos of a model UFO, and they said, "Look, we have duplicated the effect of the Meier photos." And I said, that's not really much of a trick, because you can get any kind of a sci-fi movie or disc, and you can see a duplication of an effect. Will you submit your photos to testing? The same kind of testing that Meier submitted his to, and they said, no. End of discussion. They were thrown off the Art Bell show. Now, contestant number 2 is James Randi. He confidently said that no one is stumped by the case. A child can see through the farce, though some adults have a problem with that. Presumably, I was one of the adults. After CFI West sunk slowly into the sunset, Randi said, now Michael has divined that I called the Meier case a hoax. His powers of perception are remarkable. He finds things where they don't exist. Wonderful. So he retracts his attack. Of course, he doesn't send Billy a check for $1 million, and nobody was holding their breath for it. Contestant number 3 could have been contestant number 1 because he's been around the longest time attacking the Meier case. His name is Cal Korff. He is an infamous debunker. I call him a fraud. He is an admitted liar, etc. But he is also known as Captain Cal of the Special Secret Services. With an outfit that he bought, apparently mail order, and a pretty little badge, he put himself up on a website from Czechoslovakia and announced that he was going to take care of the Meier cult, that he owned Meier's UFO photos, that new books were coming out by this company, that he had duplicated Meier's photos, films, etc., and that he was filing a $25 million lawsuit against the Meier cult and me. However, within a short period of time, his web pages were removed by his web host. No books were forthcoming. We called the publisher. They said we hadn't seen hide nor hair of him since the 1990s. He never was able to duplicate one of Meier's photos. No suit was filed. And 16 questions that I had put to him on our first 2-hour radio debate in December of 2006, where I awaited the answers in the next radio debate, he failed to answer any of them, and he has apparently not only gained further anonymity, but he's now attacking the other debunkers. This is like one of those comedies of error. Contestants 4 or 5, 2 nice gentlemen, Gene Steinberg and David Biedny. Mr. Biedny claims that he is, and he probably is, a Photoshop expert, but they claimed that they had proved that Meier had deliberately hoaxed out-of-camera double exposure using lights, a black curtain, and an enlarger. Here was the photo in question. Now, if you look down here, and I'm at a funny angle, but you'll see that there's a repetition. This structure right here, see it with the X on it, or the structure? That you can see traces of 3 images of that. Now, I point that out to you because, number 1, on a forum devoted, where they set up a forum devoted specifically to attacking me in the Meier case, one of the other people who was a participant in the forum wrote in and said, I cannot confirm Biedny's conclusion that this photo is in fact a forgery, especially since his strongest point of evidence, the line near the top of the photo, was not observed in my own analysis. This guy, DX27S, I don't think I know him. He never wrote me. Now, more interesting to me was the fact that this gentleman, whom I've known for 50 years from high school or thereabouts, is a skeptic about UFOs, even the Meier case. I don't believe any of this stuff. I said, fine. I had him look at the analysis by Biedny and the photographs in question. He said, the photo isn't a double exposure, it's actually a triple exposure. This probably was done in camera because as an accident, it would be very, very hard to do this outside of camera, and the skeptic should prove it by duplicating the photo. They refused to even try, and then, funny thing, they wouldn't comment on this one because there's no tricky artifacts of double exposure. There's simply this very bizarre light hovering over the parking lot on Meier's property. And I might add that Lee and Britt Elders had seen a similar phenomenon there. But we're going to also return to this light a little later on when we discuss another aspect of this case. These 2 guys totally freaked out when I said to them, I wrote them, I said, there's just one of me and I've got you surrounded. They took it as a threat. And I've heard that these are 2 very large gentlemen. Okay. They also consider now that Korff is nuts because he started to attack them. So these people are infighting. If anybody here has been involved in this whole thing of debunkers and attackers and all that, take some small comfort in the fact that they are now biting each other. Contestant number 6 is a fellow I've never met, haven't even seen his photo. His name is Royce Meier, and he's got something called UFO Watchdog III, where he's posted my photo and Billy Meier's photos, and he claimed that Meier faked UFO photos and films, and he employed props and stop-motion cut photography to make UFOs disappear and reappear on film. However, this, I call him a very cowardly and faceless guy. He won't come forward and prove anything at all. As a matter of fact, when I challenged him, he would not submit any proof for his claims. He referred to Korff at one point. Now, what he says about Korff is, unfortunately, those who gave him credit for past deeds will also have egg spatter on them, and Korff's previous work on the Meier case will surely suffer. Oh, gee. What should be said also about the Korff situation is he wasn't sued by the elders because when he put out his book attacking the Meier case, he was underage. It was a very clever thing. Contestant number 7, got nothing personally against this guy. He just kind of jumped in again with another one of these, I know the Meier hoax stirs up emotion. Almost everyone sees it for what it is, a hoax. So I wrote him and I challenged him, but our non-practicing attorney, Mr. Kimball, who is typical of many skeptics, failed to substantiate his claims with any evidence whatsoever. So imagine this, you've got lawyers coming on the internet, and this is the second of the lawyers, I won't even go into the other case, where they're making these statements and defaming somebody, and when you say, well, prove your case, give us your evidence, they have nothing. Of course, he did add to the fun because he's now calling Korff delusional. Contestant number 8, this is what this case has attracted and more, but these are the low points I'm giving it to you. A fellow named Jeff Ritzman, he's a professional photographer, he's a model maker, and he's a skeptic. And he claimed that he could duplicate these photos and video. This is the famous wedding cake ship. Many people still think this is a hoax. This is obviously some, collection of Christmas tree ornaments and what have you, and that's got to be a miniature tree. And this thing's just attached to it. Well, I know that it's going to be enormously hard, if not impossible, to read this. Even on my computer, it's hard. This is from a fellow named Randy Arena, who says that he has grown bonsai, miniature trees, for a long period of time, including fir trees, such as those that are depicted in the photograph by Meier, which we're also going to look at in a moment. He says it's not possible for a miniature tree to produce what he calls new club-shaped growth as shown. And he also says the cones of a miniature plant only grow to adult size after many years. Well, this is a whole detailed email he sent me on why it was not possible for this photo in particular to have been a miniature based on this new club-shaped growth and these cones. If you can read it from the distance, it says, new spring growth of fir, cones large. Oops, let me go back. A 3.5 meter unmanned beam ship in focus. And of course, the cones in the tree are not in focus because they're closer to the camera. The photo taken treetop to treetop 40 meters above the surface. The story goes that Meier was sitting on the rim of another craft taking these photos up in the tree. Now, look, let me just tell you, you're going to have to think your way through this. There are things that we think we can prove, and there are things that are speculative, even though they may well be true. I don't personally have a means of proving them, or they haven't been disproved yet to this date. So this is going to be an exercise in discernment, discretion, critical thinking, and you're not here to believe anything, I hope. Here's the photo without the writing. And here's a close-up of it. Now, I do have to tell you that for all of the time that people have been claiming that they can duplicate this, nobody has produced anything that looks close to this. However, there's a garbage can lid here, and we were told that this wedding cake ship that you just saw, I'll go back, that the base of it here is simply a large garbage can lid. Now, it looks very similar to that. Of course, this looks like it's made out of metal, and the one Phil is holding here is clearly plastic. Now, this gets into some really bizarre territory. Let's march through it. This is a contact where the alleged extraterrestrial Ptah says to Meier, regarding the controversy that has arisen about this garbage can lid and wedding cake ship, my assumption was correct that the utilization of the plan in regard to this flying device found wider-ranging interest than that merely futuristic forms of container lids were manufactured from them, as I communicated to you at our conversation on November 28, 1995. All right, some of this could get boring, but I have to put it out, so maybe later on you'll go through it and it'll help you to think through it. He's saying here that their extensive clarifications revealed that the device plans for this flying device, now here's a little asterisk I'll put in, the plans for this device had actually been impulsed in the 1920s to who? The pre-World War II, pre-Nazi Germans. Well, these plans were divided up and were used for further manufacturing, as, for example, for various forms of decoration and holding devices, for exposed bolts for furniture shelves, as well as roller bearings. A flower pot base came about from another part of the plans and configured in accord with the plan's sketch. Even the surrounding pertinent special elements for the screening of the visibility of the flying body was carried over, meaning that what we saw there in the structure of that craft, there's certain things there that contribute to that craft, as these alleged Plejaren inhabit, being able to be screened from visibility. So he's saying everything was carried over here, and indeed so precisely and correctly that no difference exists between the plan sketches and the terrestrially created product. 17 different objects apparently were manufactured as inspired by these plans that got disseminated in various European countries, as well as America and Japan, where they found utilization for the planning and manufacturing of the most varied products, some of which are still produced and utilized on Earth today. So, you know, this is the stuff you can yawn through if you want, but there it is. Let's watch this. Hopefully, there's Billy in the lower right-hand corner. There's not a lot of sound to this, but you'll probably hear him when he zooms in on this garbage can lid several hundred feet from the camera. There it is, sitting basically motionless. Some people detect, they say, a little up and down motion. I don't know.
Okay.
Now watch the second zoom. That looks like what, 150 to 200 feet perhaps?
Guns.
Now that's the distance from the camera. Folks, that's not a miniature tree. But according to Mr. Ritzman, he had duplicated and even surpassed Meier's beamship photos, and his didn't need a bonsai or model tree to hold him up. So let's look at some of these others where Ritzman claimed it was a model UFO with a bonsai or miniature tree. Pretty famous series. There's actually a few more, but many of these are available on the other discs. I don't want to bore you with it. There were some big problems with Mr. Ritzman's assertion. 6 independent forestry experts looked at the photos with Meier's UFOs next to trees. All 6 of the forestry experts concluded that these were real, full-sized, mature trees. They identified the species and the height of the trees. And as they say on those game shows, there's more. Jeff Ritzman, in an email exchange, accidentally revealed that for 14 years, he'd been cultivating miniature trees. And to prove his claims against Meier, he submits the following. Well, I have to explain this. He had made some little photos with models, but not next to any trees. And when I put it up on my website, and when I announced that I was going to be showing it here, he sent the following. Any use of my photos is a clear violation of copyright laws, as I have rejected Mr. Horn's request for use on 2 occasions. As you have located the copyright owner, I am again stating rejection of a request for use. And Mr. Horn is currently in violation. Now look, if you or I thought that something was a hoax, and we said we could prove it, and it had to do with supposedly teeny little model UFOs next to trees, and I was a tree cultivator, wouldn't I take a picture and say, post that up all over the world, let's bust this phony one-armed farmer and show him for the fraud and tree cultivator that he is. However, Mr. Ritzman declined and said that this and all further communications will be forwarded to my lawyer. Therefore, And then, of course, he had to ice the cake and said, I don't nor have I ever had any affiliation with Korf and never will. We are not colleagues, and I personally will have nothing to do with him. And that's the final word on that. It's pretty much the final word from Jeff Ritzmann. Well, couldn't Meier have used models in his UFO photos, films, and video? Just because a whole bunch of different skeptics and debunkers and model makers and miniature tree cultivators couldn't prove it and couldn't duplicate it, does that really mean that he didn't use it? The truthful answer is no. That's not good enough. Let's find out. Here is a letter from Wendell Stevens in response to a question I asked him. He said to me, Dear Michael, there were 2 perfect models made by the MGM Studios Special Effects Department, which we carried to Switzerland and used in an attempt to duplicate any one of Meier's photos. They were big 18 and 24-inch diameter models, perfectly painted to match the colors in Meier's photos, his pictures. After we had suspended them in a number of the scenes photographed by Billy and had Billy photograph the model in those scenes for us from the same positions, I'll show more of that in a minute, as for the originals, with the same camera and identical ASA 100 positive slide film like originally used, we gave them to Billy. Later, I saw one of them hanging from the ceiling of his little lean-to study, which is now gone. I do not know what happened to them after that. Jim Delatoso easily identified the photos with the model in them, though we pretended we had found new pictures in Billy's files. When I first gave JD copies of the model photos we had shot, I simply said we had more UFO photos from Switzerland. After he looked at them, he wanted to know more about the new pictures, as they were not the same as the earlier ones. Excuse me. Then I told him how we made them. Regards, Wendell. In other words, they photographed the model, sent them in to Jim Delatosa for analysis without letting him in on it to see if he could determine if they were the same kind of photos. And in every case, as Wendell's written about before, he could clearly say that these were not the same kind of ship. And there were some very specific reasons for that, which I won't go into now, but we have it all on the website, the parameters of the testing, which accounted for that. So look at the detail on this ship, for example. If you can see, and I don't know how well, but there's a good deal of work around the rim and on the cupola. Now watch this. This is the large model. And we've never shown this before, but we figure it's about time. This was made by MGM. It cost $400 to be made at the time, in the early 1980s. So someone walks it around the grounds here to show what it would look like, and it's pretty good looking. Just look at it carefully and see if that looks as good to you as that, for instance, which was taken a couple of years before the model was ever made. And watch this. Especially watch the ship. There are going to be 2 lights that flash on and off, and I'll say when. I won't distract you with the green light. There. Now watch again. Right there. Did you see it? That's the sound of the ship. Were you able to see the little lights? That's in daytime, filmed rather, several years before a model was made. Now you saw what it took to maneuver a model around. There are 8 different film segments. We have as many as 3 of the UFOs hovering on them. For instance, here's a shot that Meier has of 3 of the UFOs, again taken before a model was made by the MGM Special Effects Department. Here's another photo taken from a film that Meier shot, where the 3 UFOs hover and then 2 just disappear in one frame, and the one in the center remains, which even from the distance and the distance you're sitting at, you should be able to determine is far better made and more detailed than what we just thought. So that's what we just saw. That should be food for thought. So my suggestion to the skeptics would be to try saying this out loud. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. And if they would repeat that frequently, we could all make progress together, because actually there's nothing wrong with healthy skepticism. I'm sure you agree. As a matter of fact, in a moment I'm going to offend a lot of people here, because I happen to also be a skeptic. and a skeptic about some things that are held near and dear to people in the UFO community. So the final results, the failed skeptic challenge to the Meier case is, in my opinion, now over. If anybody wants to go ahead and show us how he did it, then you certainly can try to revive that. Excuse me. Now here's where we put up the screen for me so the tomatoes don't hit me while I do my presentation. Introducing the first annual Dubious Achievement Award for Overactive Imagination. And the winner is, did I say this? Exopolitics for their version of The Emperor Has No Clothes. Let me explain. Let me quote. There are an extensive number of extraterrestrial races known by various research institutions and agencies to be currently interacting with Earth and the human population. Michael Salla also goes on to say, in a separate location, Alex Collier is a genuine, lifelong Andromedan contactee. Is there a problem with any of that? Why am I making an issue? Well, I said that I got the contact reports in 1986. I wrote about how I acquired them in an article in 1999 in the Beyond Great UFO Photos, UFO magazine. So this is an excerpt, and since you can't see it, I'm going to give you some of the highlights or lowlights, because this is important to me, and I'll explain why. In 1986, I won't read every word, I'll give you the point of this. I was in a little cafe in Sedona, Arizona, with my daughter and a lady who was a friend of mine. We were the only people in there with the exception of one guy sitting in the back. It was a health food cafe. Now, if you have ever ordered an avocado sandwich in a health food cafe where there's hardly anybody in it, you know that exponentially it's going to take that much longer for the sandwich to be served. So we got to talking with this fellow who was in the back of the cafe. It was a very nice guy. His name was Ralph Amagran. Ralph revealed to me in our little discussion that he was a former IRS agent and that he was now very involved in studying UFOs and fascinated with the field. One thing led to another, and we came upon the discussion of the Billy Meier case, and he said to me, "Have you read the contact notes?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you've got the book by Lee and Britt." And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "You know those quotes with those funny names?" I said, "Yeah." He says, those are the extraterrestrials talking, and they told Billy a whole bunch of stuff. And I've got 1,800 pages up there. It's great. When you come back to L.A., come up to Decker Canyon, and I'll show them to you. So I did. When I got back to L.A., I looked up Ralph, went up there. We spent a lot of time we spent maybe a half a dozen different visits with each other. He gave me the 1,800 pages, which was very generous. And at night, we would stand outside and we'd be on UFO saucer watch. And as my little article here says, I'll get back to this page in a second. As the page says, we probably saw more UFOs per evening, which were Cessnas, seagulls, whatever. But Ralph had a tremendous imagination, fertile imagination, even more fertile than my own. However, now we get to the sticky stuff. It came to the attention of Michael Salla in the Exopolitics Forum that I was telling this tale about Alex Collier. Oh yeah, because Ralph later changed his name to Alex Collier. I was at an expo in LA and I saw Ralph walk by. This was a few years later, and I said, "Hi, Ralph." And he didn't say hello to me. I felt a little funny. There was a little contingent of people, and so when one of the ladies came by later on, I said, "Hey, what's with Ralph?" She said, "Who's Ralph?" I said, "The guy you're walking." She says, "That's Alex Collier, lifelong Andromedan contactee." I said, "That's funny. He used to be Ralph Amagran." Oh, well. So I was being chewed out on the Exopolitics board for lying about this and for making terrible, slanderous remarks. And I was also told on the forum there, Meier wasn't authentic, and he's certainly not the only genuine contactee. And finally, after I was losing my cool, let me tell you, all over the place, so Michael Salla sent me links. He said, "Here's where you're going to find the proof that Alex Collier is the real deal, and you'd better go check this out before you open your mouth again, buddy." So I did, and I've some of the excerpts of what I found. Here's some of the prophecies, literal prophecies from Alex Collier. The moon is an artificial hollow structure that can pull out anytime it wants to. It's 11,421 miles in diameter, as opposed to the actual 2,160 miles in diameter that Earth scientists determined. There's a bridge on the moon that's 21 miles long. The same structure exists on Venus, despite the fact that the surface temperatures would have melted anything. Between 1996 and 1997, 1/3 of Japan will sink below the ocean surface. And did that happen? Did I miss it? Okay. Extraterrestrials will land and show themselves in 97, and between 96 and 2004, major U.S. cities are under TB quarantine. Not only that, but on August 12, 2003, the moon will be gone. It's out of here. It's had enough. The New World Order has 35,000 people, Earth people, living in compounds on the moon. You can kiss them goodbye, too, because they're going wherever the moon's going. Hundreds of thousands of children each year are taken by Greys, Orions, and Pleiadians, and they're gone. The reptilians enjoy human flesh, and human children are best. They had some temperatures there at on a steam boil rate. Our system originally contained 3 suns, and our original blood color was green and blue. And perhaps the most accurate quote of all: there is life as we speak, right now, on Uranus, according to Ellis. Okay. Now, on top of that, since this lifelong Andromedan contactee had come forward with volumes of this stuff, and I was the one who was incorrect, I wondered why he hadn't even taken one photo similar to this, because this, according to Meier, who at least has some evidence to argue about, this and the preceding photo I showed you of it, from a little race of Andromedans who are basically in semi-material and light form, and this is a light craft. This craft, supposedly, as they say, populated by little tiny Andromedan people, Meier could have no contact with them. They simply came, they visited, the ship changed shape, it got longer, there was a ball of light at a certain point, but nothing from Alex to substantiate that story. So I was ticked. And to this day, and I asked many times, Michael, would you either explain or defend or retract your support for all that nonsense? You sent me these links. This man is a contactee, blah, blah. Nothing. So I say he can pick up his award backstage or maybe show me where I've made my mistakes. Well, why can't we all just get along, and why do I have to be such a grumpy little troll and cause trouble here in the UFO community? Because, to the best of my knowledge, these claims are not true. Let's remember that I'm representing a case here of a man who's been vilified and had 21 attempts on his life for standing in his own truth. And when our future survival is the issue, which I have my position on it is that it is, why indulge in fantasies? Why should we run ourselves around in silly circles? If ETs really wanted to meet us, they've had a long time to do so. Well, then, what about me? Well, I'll tell you what about me. I'm frequently accused of saying that the Meier case is the only genuine case. Everybody else is wrong. I'm overzealous, I'm impatient, and I have very, very, very bad netiquette. I flame on forums when I'm attacked. The truth is that I'm often guilty of that, all of that stuff. But I still haven't seen anything comparable as proof for any other case in more than 28 years. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, that you or somebody else doesn't have it. I simply have not seen it. And so, let me make this clear. This is the position as expressed by Guido Musburger that expresses Meier's point of view and that of the alleged extraterrestrial Pleiarans. The language of diplomacy is commonly used among us on Earth, serves primarily as a means of gaining some type of advantage at the cost of others. The realities are usually improperly and falsely rendered with this form of language, and they degenerate into deadly misunderstandings. The truth may never be spread in diplomatic form. Truth must call the facts by name as they really are, straightforwardly, without belittlement or misappropriation. Further, according to this regarding Meier, to the regret of modern mankind, a prophet denounces all grievances with aggressive words and spares no one and nothing in doing so. For those who feel personally addressed, this is naturally not very flattering and does not suit them the least bit. But with the current deplorable state of affairs on Earth, the necessary clarity cannot be accomplished by any other way than with harsh language. So what are we really searching for? If it isn't diplomacy and everybody getting along and just saying, yeah. We're searching for what the I Ching calls inner truth. I love this because it's such a nice little poetic Eastern way of putting it. And this is important, and I guess not everybody can read this, so bear with me. I'm not going to make you listen to me read everything here, but this one's a good one. But it's important to understand on what the force of inner truth depends. This force is not identical with simple intimacy or a secret bond. Close ties may exist also among thieves. It is true that such a bond acts as a force, but since it is not invincible, it does not bring good fortune. All association on the basis of common interests holds only up to a certain point. Where the community of interest ceases, the holding together ceases also. And the closest friendship often changes into hate. Only when the bond is based on what is right, on steadfastness, will it remain so firm that it triumphs over everything. And that's what we have to keep in mind in our world, in our lives, on every level. And no one has the exclusive ownership of truth, not the alleged Playaran or Billy Meier or Guido Mutzberg or me, you, or anyone else. We each have to find it and find it for ourselves. We can disagree, but if our goal is the same, if we want to get to the truth, we are in common purpose. We can forgive a little bit of overzealousness, harsh language, etc., if we understand that this external evidence, all of it, requires internal evaluation. So with the Meier case, we have to go beyond the physical evidence. I have enough material if you want to evaluate the photos and films and sounds and metals. We've got DVDs and books and all sorts of great stuff. But we want to determine the credibility of the Playaran information. So what is it that I'm still trying to prove? See this? One of the sheets of the contact notes, contact reports. I alluded to it earlier, the 1,800 pages of the transcripts that Meier had produced by 1978. By the end of it, of his 3 years or so of official contacts, he claimed. There was a numbering system put in place here that was simple and foolproof and helped to authenticate these documents, because Meier had to number each sentence that was spoken by one of these alleged extraterrestrials. And this rendered the documents unalterable and eliminated revision after dissemination. And the reason for it was really cool, because these documents were actually being translated into, that was originally in German, they were getting translated into as many as 5 languages starting in the mid-1970s. So every place that an alleged extraterrestrial said in sentence number 6, I want to tell you the following, it was the same sentence in every language and in every copy. That meant that Billy Meier couldn't go back years later and make himself look good and hot and fancy as a quote-unquote prophet by changing it. So what we have in texts and even in copyrighted, published, dated books is what was in those documents. There are some exceptions where we cannot prove prior publication. I'll just tell you that right up. But we have enough of them where a critical thinker is going to have some ahas. In this 35th contact in 1975, Meier was given abundant information about the connection between A-bomb explosions and all of this damage to the environment. Elementary radiations going up into the UV, damage to the ozone layer, etc., etc. And I was reading this in 1986. Alex had given me these documents, and I got to read all these conversations and all this information. A lot of neat scientific stuff in there. I say here that Meier published it 13 to 17 years before new discoveries. Well, what I mean is, I first saw in this newspaper in 1988. 2 years after I'd read the documents, I had stuck them under my bed. There was nothing more I could do with them. I'd think about them, occasionally pull something out and read it. But in 1988, I see this article about a new discovery from Lawrence Livermore Labs. And it says that A-bomb testing is tied to the ozone depletion. And they give this percentage and everything. I'm thinking, Why does that not seem like a new discovery? And so I went under the bed and pulled out the dusty, 100-page bound folders. And I opened it up and I start leafing through it. As early as the 7th contact and then later in the 35th contact, etc., is all this information about the environmental damage. But Meier is also in there in 75, referring to when he was told this before in the 1950s. And I didn't have access to it. I couldn't know what he was talking about. But like this other article here about the ozone hole damages the food chain that was published in 92, that's in there too. Now here was, in 1976, Semyaze says to him, that is to be understood in this way, that Earthman exploits his planet and robs it of the fundamental life energy in that he robs from it the underground oil and gas and the most diverse ores. This leads to the fact that the Earth suffers shifts within, which leads to enormous volcanic eruptions and earthquakes because slowly the Earth collapses from within. 1990. Earthquakes, oil interact, according to Dr. or Professor Paul Siegel, where he sees the connection between extracting gas and oil from the Earth and precipitating earthquake and volcanic activity. But I found out later on that that wasn't the first time that Meier mentioned that either. But it's good enough because this was the first public article I could find when I did an internet search. So when I tried to either prove or disprove Meier's so-called prophetic information, I went on and did what you can do. I went on the internet and I would put in the circumstance or the situation and look to see if it occurred, what were the details, and what's the first known publication of it. In each case, with the exception of one of the literally dozens and dozens, first of all, they all occurred. With the exception of one case where Meier wasn't the first person to publish the information, he was the first person to publish it in all other cases, including earthquakes, landslides, wars, terrorist activities, deaths of people, etc. That got my attention. The earth will not come to rest because earthquakes of much greater magnitude will shake her. However, they will be of a terrible magnitude to a degree that nations and islands will sink. Unusually severe droughts will move across the world in order then to be succeeded by flooding of severe proportions. Well, that got me to thinking, so I went back and started to read. I wanted to know what the Pleiaren thought about this and about that. Maybe I'd missed some things. So pertinent to what we're involved with, I wanted to know, what do the Pleiaren think about, we're jumping around here, UFOs? According to them, most sightings, nowadays for sure, are secret military craft, and the UFO cover-up started in 1915. We have free articles on my website where you can read the transcripts where they flesh this out. I'm giving you some bullet points. In 1915, over the battlefields of Europe, these objects were seen hovering. Each side thought it belonged to the other. They finally figured it out, that it's not ours, it's not theirs. And there was a pact, a de facto agreement made, whereby nobody would let this whole extraterrestrial thing become known, and that the major powers in agreeing to not disclose also kind of went along with the negative ET image as promoted and promulgated by the U.S., especially through, I guess, the Roosevelt and Truman era. The War of the Worlds radio broadcast, some of you know about that, was done with some severe arm twisting to both H.G. Wells and Orson Welles. Under threat to their lives and their families, they would go ahead and get this tailored for radio, and he would do it, and they would start to put out an image, an idea of hostile, deadly, deformed, weird alien creatures coming here to harm us. Some of this information has already been alluded to some degree. There's more in the Meier material on that. They also say that part of the agenda is for a fake UFO attack. Now, you may notice that in the past several months, we've had the O'Hare Airport in, North Carolina, and someplace else recently. Where's that? Yes, whatever he said. That they're seeing, UFOs, and people are getting some vague photos and what have you. Gee, all of a sudden, that's making the news and the Drudge Report and everything else, right? Where you couldn't buy your way in with a new UFO story just a few months ago or a year ago. Now there's UFOs all over the place. Well, control of the masses, and I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, I really am not. I don't go for most of it. I don't doubt it, though, at this point. The biochipping, we see evidence of that. They were telling Meier about this, Well, you'll see. Meier wrote about it even earlier. Cloning, according to Meier, has been going on for 30 years in this country. It's secret military levels in various types of ways, not only a genetic type of cloning, but through drugs and surgery, the altering. And what they are saying is that a lot of what we think are extraterrestrials, if and when we see, if it isn't a hallucination or a bad dream, and there's a real interaction, they're saying, sorry folks, those ain't coming from out there, they're coming from down here. Well, now that we are stirring those waters and having a lot of people go, I don't think so. What do they say about extraterrestrials? Terrestrials? Well, overpopulation is a huge problem, but that's probably not what they meant by that. Okay. According to the Pleiaren, and this is when you get into the vast histories contained in the Meier material, for which the contact reports from the 1970s as well as ongoing contain the details of so much. It's beyond imagination. It certainly was actually even beyond Ralph's imagination. There's a fellow whose name was pronounced Nocodemian, and more than 12 billion years ago, it is alleged, this is speculative because I can't prove it, right? Neither can you, I guarantee you. He was a progenitor of races and a very wise, highly developed being, and he had some peoples that he was kind of, if you will, a ruler over. I guess it happens all the time. These people split into two main lineages. One group settled in what were called the Lyrian territories, Lyra Vega star system, and the other group settled in the Sirius star system. And many of our own distant ancestors are said to have originated there in the Sirian star system because they were supposedly bred as a warrior race for this group. This group decided to alter its own genetics to only move itself towards harmony, abundance, peace, spiritual things, beauty, opulence, and the arts, and they actually genetically engineered out of themselves their own fighting spirit as well. They then became prey for other races that were space travelers who saw them as an easy mark. Well, they caught on pretty quickly that they had to rectify their own condition, and in the process, they brought a race into being of humans, and they made a couple of specific genetic modifications to them. They dropped the lifespan down from way beyond 1,000 years to under 100, and they increased the propensity for violence and aggression so they'd be a willing warrior race, but they wouldn't live long enough to overthrow their overlords, because part of building in this limited lifespan had to do with building in propensity for degenerative diseases of all sorts. So they're in the genetic code, a lot of these things. These colonizations that were part of the Lyrian and even the Syrian system, peoples had gone on over countless millennia. People had come to this planet as far back as 22 million years ago. The Lyrians came here prominently 389,000, 289,000, and even as recently as 13,500 years ago. This means that there were comings and goings. Sometimes there'd be people that would stay here, build a civilization. It would rise, it would fall. Some people would be stranded in a relatively primeval world. If their technology failed them, they would revert. They would actually degenerate. Some of these people were quite gigantic. The Lyrians were gigantic warriors with high tech available. While they were oftentimes spiritually developed people, they weren't always operating according to what we might even call spiritual development. 133,000 years ago, we're told in the Meier material, is the actual inception of Atlantis and Mu, sometimes called Lemuria. And we have here just a couple notes about some people like Aros, who was an extraterrestrial human being who attacked the Sumerians, who were descendants of the Syrians, and this was in India, Pakistan, and Persia. The gods, these different high-powered extraterrestrials, were called Ishwish in this Lyrian language that is still used by the Pleiaren, this term. And Ishwish, or Ishrish for the females, these were the gods. And they have come down, as you'll see, and as we already know, through all of our legends. So many gods and races came. Some were stranded here, some degenerated, as I said. The key is that all of them in time forgot their true extraterrestrial origins and histories. Even the ones that settled on the other planets in our solar system, such as Mars and Malona or Maldek or Phaeton, They had no idea of their own origins. And even the extraterrestrials that brought them here, taking them from the Sirian system so they wouldn't be destroyed once their usefulness had been outlived, even those extraterrestrials in time had lost track of their own histories. Now here's a really important thing. 52 million spirits, extraterrestrial spirits, let's see if I can actually hit this thing, of extraterrestrial humans who've come here over time and who died here on this planet, anytime from millions to hundreds of thousands, thousands of years ago, whatever, accordingly have been incarnating or reincarnating on Earth. Therefore, many people, many among us are already of extraterrestrial origin. It's a big so what? Now, this is for illustration purposes only, because I'm not telling you that these are authentic photos. These were gigantic warriors, and if these people indeed had been buried in the sands of Egypt, their skeletons might look like this next to the excavators. And this mock-up, according to a reported find, would show a human next to a drawing and a human femur bone of some assumed giant extraterrestrial that was here. Again, this is for illustration only. Don't show this to your children. So here's a little poem for you. Let's try a little right brain. There once came a race of giants from a distant war-torn star, looking for new worlds to conquer, to spread power near and far. Protected by their loyal soldiers called guard angels, cherubim, the leaders soon established order for their new reign to begin. With their knowledge and their wisdom, they did alter forms of life. Masters of the laws of science, of their deeds would ancients write, that they took a wild human, mixed in her celestial seed. For 1,000 generations, we've misunderstood this deed. From this one, many descended, their days marked with pain and blood. Kingdoms came and kingdoms ended. Few survived deluge and flood. Other races, same, were fashioned, or from stranded travelers grew. Star seed mixed through human passion. Sons of gods were formed anew. Above them, in a ship, did hover one who called himself their Lord, demanding worship of no other. With threats of vengeance he enforced. Over time, the races scattered, distant memories they preserved, handed down through spoken legend and in books as holy word, regarding the extraterrestrial presence on Earth. There once was a splinter group from the Pleiaren. They were called the Giza intelligences, or the Ba'ath. They were based deep beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. There was a leader named Aru-Sem, who was a brother of Ptah and Salem, who ruled until 3010 BC. We probably know the name Ptah. We've heard it from ancient Egypt as well as from the alleged extraterrestrial of these times. Then Jehovah, who was also known as Hen. Then, Kamagal the first in 2080 BC. He started his reign then. Kamagal the first was the one who introduced blood sacrifice to earthly religions, not only in the Middle East, but in South and or Central America. All terrestrial religions were created or assisted in creation and misdirected by the Ba'ath. They controlled hundreds of politicians and religious leaders. They were the hidden negative force behind the Tula and society and Hitler. They did this through a sophisticated telenotic electronic means of mind control. Kamagal II was engaged in the mass murderings of Earth humans. He was a force behind this type of thing. He lived a long time, finally died in 1976, according to the Pleiaren. They were creating a false second coming, which Meier was introduced to in this chamber down deep below the Great Pyramid, where he saw artifacts, a remanufactured cross of the crucifixion, a spear, bag of old coins, blood-encrusted nails, and crown of thorns. And he thought, he was a young man at the time, that Asket, one of the extraterrestrials, allegedly took him down there. And he said, this must be the crucifixion materials of the man Jesus. And she said, well, I got a couple surprises for you. One, he was never called Jesus. And number two, these were made by these people. And they're using this, they want to have a false second coming. There's a man named Reinhold Schmidt. He's a corn merchant in California, and they've been impulsing him with real visions, holograms, to make him think he's on board spaceships with them, and that he is the second coming, and he's going to be able to produce these artifacts and show everybody. And wow, well, because the B'Phath inadvertently attacked a Pleiaren beam ship in 1978, the Pleiaren could act in self-defense and remove them from the planet. Remember, according to this, they were based here for thousands of years. Does this explode every time I do this? They were based here for thousands of years. And, okay, maybe I shouldn't say, that's it. And they were finally removed by the Pleiaren. It's a long story. It's already a long story. But their negative influence still lingers because they were behind so many of these religions, secret societies, blood cults, and political movements and isms to play both sides against each other. You understand? Okay. So, according to the Pleiaren, true ET from out there human contacts are rare, and actual ET abductions actually rarer. Why? Because the Assyrian forefathers, for one thing, had genetically manipulated our ancestors. They shortened the lifespans, they increased our aggression, and with supposedly 42 million plus human races alone in this universe, ta-da, no one needs our corrupted, short-lived, and violent genes. And nobody's helping us to correct it. Our scientists will figure it out. Therefore, if you still think that ETs want to contact you, I'm not the one to argue with. Maybe you've been chosen for the petting zoo. I don't know. Careful, don't feed, they bite, etc., etc. So really, aren't we all citizens, all of us, these 42 million plus human and other perhaps non-human races, citizens of one universe, what the Pleiaren call this creation? This universe that they say is actually got spiral energy going through a basically egg-shaped structure that's got 7 belts to it. This blue area here, the material belt, supposedly in which all of space and planets and galaxies, that's existing within a belt of an actual structure, an egg-shaped structure. The universe, according to them. Some parts of this universe are absolutely empty of anything except spiritual energy. And my big question has always been, what's outside of space? Well, now my question has to be, what's outside of this creation or this universe? And I actually asked that of Meier. I said, look, this whole thing, because they say there's literally billions of these and we're not in the first one. I said, well, that's great and that's mind-boggling, but I want to know what's outside of it. What is the void? Where is this stuff in this great nothingness? And he said, I do not know that. The Pleiaren don't know that. The human mind cannot grasp that. The best we can understand somehow is that the void is an endlessness filled with fine spiritual energy. But that raises other questions, doesn't it? So there we are. Here we are, stuck in this big egg on a little piece of cosmic lint, floating around in space. So, really, is everybody being visited? I mean, do we have extraterrestrials walking around in the supermarket lines reading the Globe about extraterrestrials? Are they on subway trains? Or are they us too? And so what? What's the point? Let's get on with the real task at hand, if we may. Which, according to the Pleiaren, is to wake up. Every human being on this planet, wake the heck up and continue to wake up after the 8 to 12 we may get of slumber if we're lucky. The world is at the threshold of the silent revolution of truth. I want to tell you about that phrase, the silent revolution of truth. Allegedly, there was a contest held on the planet Era, a planet in the Pleiadian system that is not the Pleiades we see in the night sky, but beyond it, in an altered time-space configuration, which doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not a physicist. The contest was held with the populace there, which they keep well under 1 billion people, just over 500 million. And the contest was to encapsulate in a slogan, in a phrase, what Meier's mission on Earth is about in this incarnation. And the winning entry was this little phrase, the silent revolution of truth. And the person that won this was named Claudina Icarina. She's an 11-year-old, at the time, 11-year-old Pleiadian girl, and her prize was to come with Ptah to Earth, to Switzerland, to beam into Billy's office and to shake his hand and say hello to Billy Meier. And there's actually a transcript in the contact notes where they have their little meeting, and it's just a very sweet little interaction. How nice to meet you. I know we may never meet again. It's just very non-dramatic, but that's the little rider on this term. So the Meier case isn't really so much about UFOs and extraterrestrials as it is about the power of the human spirit. And that is that spark, that flame, that individual hologram of the creation, that the creation itself, this ultimate consciousness of all creation, all that exists within itself, it gives this holographic spark to each human, not the soul, which is a transitory temporal structure, but the human spirit, this immortal aspect that is put into each human being at the 21st day conception. If that proves to be true, we can resolve the abortion issue, as they have, because they say, well, we know that at the 21st day the spirit attaches to the embryo, so we don't do any abortions after that time. We're humans, things happen, we make sure that we do this beforehand, and we can detect when we're pregnant earlier than your females can, and we know when the spirit's coming, so we don't do that. So both sides are right, and both sides are wrong. But one thing is, there is no original sin that we are responsible for. The spirit comes in for each fresh new incarceration, perhaps, and then we are here to evolve over countless millions of lifetimes. And the consciousness and the personality form again, the soul, mainly situated in the solar plexus, right? Got called soul, constructs and comes into being. And the spirit is you'd say it's a perfect balance of positive and negative. We have to have both positive and negative experiences to grow. And so the spirit, too, has this potential for the positive and the negative. And over these countless millions and millions of lifetimes, the spirit, too, is evolving. It's not fallen, it's simply in a more ignorant state at the earlier stages of incarnation. Our human spirits, those of us sitting here, our spirits are already millions of years old, have gone already through hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of incarnations of shorter or lesser degree, and always as humans, never as animals, cantaloupes, or insects. Although it could be arranged. Now, that's the TH sound, I can't do that. Thousands of this. This is what the true prophets of all ages are trying to tell us. And it's the message that's been corrupted by virtually every religion. The power of the human spirit. And the problem is that all religion and all religions rest on the following inadmissible, catastrophically illogical premise. What's in this book is true because the book says it's true. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't truth in religions, books, what have you. But this premise is true because it's in this book. You can't do that in a kindergarten, or first grade classroom if you start with books. You can't do that in a court of law or an institution of higher learning. You say something's true, you've got to go about proving it. I've been making presentations in the Meier case for almost 20 years, quote unquote, to prove it. Proof is a matter of you take all of the best evidence and you have to think through it and come to some logical conclusion, not because it's in a Billy Meier book or in a Bible or in any other form. So think about it. The person who chooses the religion, the God, is the authority. It's not the other way around. Here's an example. We have a big room like this. We set out some tables. We put out the Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata, whatever, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, name something else that's a holy book, whatever. Put it out. Of course, the Quran. And put this out, leave room so people can line up, and let 1,000 people who have no religious affiliation but are interested flood in, give them a week, and let them read the books. And then at the end of the week, or whenever arbitrary period of time, you say, okay, line up behind the truth. Every one of those books is going to have somebody in multiples lined up behind it. As many people as you have in the room, you're going to have some of them are going to line up behind the one truth with the one God, and therefore, who's the authority in any religion? It's the person. This is the truth. This is the guy. This is the one. Well, I'm not picking on you, but don't you think we should start to recognize that we are authorizing on every level what's true in life? And I said in the beginning, it is up to us to figure this out. We have to discern it. Now, the Plejaren are less, quote-unquote, diplomatic. All earthly religions, and this was Asket from the Tao universe, not a Plejaren, are possessed by boundless power, greed, and the actual manifestation of the goal of all of them consists of gaining world dominion. Religion is the greatest and most dangerous power for the obtaining of world dominion, which without exception is striven for by all belief directions as far as they are aligned in a religious or secret society manner. Undoubtedly, all earthly governments are steered and led in religious manner, or at least are subject to a certain religious influence. And these governments, on the other hand, also independently undertake constant efforts on a political basis to seize world dominion for themselves. These vicious efforts on both sides have again and again led to war actions and to other death-bringing transgressions, whereby uncountable human lives were annihilated. Gee, could that be true? Well, you certainly don't have to believe that. You can think about it. You can also pick up the newspaper, turn on the radio, the internet. But thinking is an inside job, so think about this. Reincarnation is a fact of life. That's something to think about. And now think about this. Don't worry about dying. You'll live through it. That's the good news, right? So let's talk about prophets. I mentioned prophets before. I threw that off when I mentioned Billy Meier as a prophet, and somebody here, certainly at least one person's going, oh, what do you mean? How can you say that? Prophets of the old age, Enoch or Henoch, and these are the years that the Plejaren say they were born and died in. We go from Enoch to Elijah, to Isaiah, to Jeremiah, to Emmanuel and Muhammad. Now I'm going to come back here. Let's just put it this way. Remember I told you long ago about Nocodemian, a being who was a very, very high-level being who had lived billions of years ago. It was said that he had gone through evolution and into the semi-material, semi-physical, into the totally energetic light body form, into the lower levels of spiritual realms. Speculation, I grant you. Don't know. It is said that that spirit agreed, instead of to continue in the spiritual evolution for billions and billions of more years in the disembodied form, to go back into the incarnational cycle, to function as a prophet on different worlds where lineages of its original peoples, remember, from the Lyrian Vegan system, had incarnated and gone south, just taken bad left turns and degenerated and become warlike and crazy and overly, zealous and religious and what have you. So this spirit form agreed to go back into incarnation, meaning it would have to forget on conscious levels its previous grandeur, elevated abilities and knowledge. And in each life, just like each of us, would have to be educated again by teachers who were wiser than the human being it would become in each human incarnation. Those human beings would be we're told, the Pleiaren of going back 13,500 years ago. Remember we said some of the Illyrian came here? They had become also the Pleiaren people. These histories are vast, they're complex, and they're fun to read through. So, with, bring that back up here, okay. With the prophets of the old age, I said we had Enoch or Henoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and then we come to somebody, Emmanuel, what's that, with a J? That's the fella whose name got changed to Jesus, according to this information. We know in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, of which I know only very little and happen to have found that part, 7:14 or whatever, that Isaiah foretells the coming of Emmanuel, spelled either with an E or an I, but not with a J as it survived in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, in the book of Matthew, I think it's in the first chapter when you're talking about the birth of Jesus, in there suddenly, inexplicably, he has this thing about, and his name will be called Emmanuel. And somebody forgot to take the whole thing out because his name was supposed to be Emmanuel through the whole thing, if what's in the Meier case is true. Now, Muhammad is said to also have been an incarnation of this same spirit form, as was in Emmanuel and Jeremiah before him, etc. His teachings, it is said, were also corrupted. We'll get to that. The prophet of the New Age, according to the Pleiaren material, is a man named Billy Edward Albert Meier. A man, a person, a human being. This brings us to our most important slide for this part of the program. Prophets and gods. They are always human beings, and they are never to be worshipped, deified, exalted, adored, but only respected as teachers, instructors, and way-showers. If history and religious history is any evidence of it, we know that they are also always having a rather thankless job. They will be persecuted, vilified, hacked up, crucified, attacked, their teachings falsified, they'll be turned into all sorts of things. So keep this in mind so that if the temptation arises, as it certainly will as we go farther into this, well, he's saying that Billy Meier is a prophet, and his spirit's the same one as us. Oh my goodness, it's blasphemy. Well, no, it's just life. Meier can type about 60 words a minute with one hand. He used to be able to type a little faster than is shown here. He could do that for hours at a time when he was receiving. Here, let me just explain in case you don't know about this. Allegedly, when Meier has a contact from 75 on, whether it's in a meadow or in an office or in a ship, it's recorded on their devices. Big deal. We've got tape recorders too. When he gets home after a certain period of time, when he's rested up, he goes into his study. Used to just have an electronic typewriter, right? Now he's got the computer. They have a device that sends the entire conversation to him in symbol form, in pictograms, that he was trained since childhood to recognize well over 3 million different picture symbols and their meaning in German, and simultaneous as he receives it at 60 words a minute to type it out into the conversation in German that he had with the numbers and everything. Oh boy, you want to be an ET contactee. Get ready for this. So he's transcribed over 24,000 pages with one hand in German. Information and teachings, 55 years of specific, prophetically accurate information, 6 categories of still irreproducible physical evidence. He allegedly writes the spiritual teaching for the Pleiaren. Well, how can that be? Well, in this cosmology, and again, it's speculative, if the spirit form of Billy Meier, Billy Edward Albert Meier, Swiss farmer, is the same one as these other prophets who get tutored and brought up to speed by the Pleiaren, but have this ancient form inside of them, it's a more ancient and advanced and knowledgeable essence than they. So Meier, I don't have it on here, but I have to tell you this funny story. If I didn't tell it last year, starting about 3-4 years ago, when I would sit with Billy in the office, I would talk to him, and one day I looked over and I saw all these pieces of paper that were sticking out of the printer, right? And I look over and he says, oh, yes, I write the spirit teachings for the Pleiaren. I go, Okay. And he says, but you know it's a big problem because Quetzal always has to come and beam into the office and go and take the paper and go back into his ship and go back to the Pleiades, and then they translate it and fix it up. I said, yeah. He says, so next week, Zafanat Paneak is coming. He's their computer specialist, and he knows how to fix my computer. So now I can type it out. It'll go to a separate server, to a little disk above the earth, and then it goes direct to the Pleiades, and Quetzal doesn't have to come and pick it up. And I went, uh-huh. So the year after that, 1 year later and change, I'm in the office with Billy, and there's a bunch of, I look over again, and I think, I said to him, Billy, and he says, oh, those papers, I write the spirit teaching for the Pleiades, and it's been a big problem. And he goes through the same story again. He says, but Zafanat Paneak came last year and he fixed my computer. So that's not for them anymore. That's for our thing here. Because now when I type it out, it goes to a separate server and it goes to a disk above the earth and it goes right back to the same story, right? Except the guy had already done it. And then he says, but there's another problem. And I said, well, what's the problem? He says, he screwed something up in my computer and he has to come back and fix that. So he's got an IT from outer space, right? So this last year in May, I thought, the guy can't remember the same made-up story 3 years in a row, if it's a joke. So I'm with him, and I said, so Billy, what about your computer? Did it ever get fixed? Oh, yeah, I write the spirit. I swear to gosh, the same thing. He says, but now he adds this, he says, yeah, I just type in a code that gives me the separate server and it goes to the same story. We went to make some filming in September because we're doing this new documentary. And we get over there, and while Jack, my director friend, is there, I throw it at him again. Same exact thing. So I figure either the guy has got not only a rich fantasy life, but a photographic memory and can come up with the same piece of trivia and just knock it down each, or maybe he's telling the truth. Okay, and for his trouble of over 65 years of ongoing contacts with these people, there have been 21 documented assassination attempts. So with prophecies, why are we fascinated with these prophecies? They're like weather reports, except you can't change the weather. A prophecy is still changeable until it becomes a prediction. So why the inaction? Some inconvenient truth from Billy Meier, circa 1951. Al Gore, eat your heart out. Still, there's time to stop the monster that's prophesied for the future of the entire terrestrial humanity. Let me just hit the bullet points. He's talking about the fact that at least in 1951, countermeasures could be enacted to change things for the better if the scientists, the authorities, the governments, and the military were up to it. Otherwise, he says, if that doesn't happen, then unimagined horrors are imminent, whereby, in every respect, the world power USA would lead the foremost front of the sword of death, as well as destruction and annihilation, while towing the line are Israel and all those countries who nestle in sanctimonious friendship with the USA, and indeed against the will of the sensible element of the respective peoples. Not only wars, terror, destruction, and annihilation, with all these deaths and destruction and all that, but a monstrous overpopulation will be to blame, as all natural laws will get thrown out of kilter. Through the guilt of the people, all storms will assume increasing and more violent forms, such as hailstorms, blizzards, flooding, rains, as however, also the ozone layer will become very seriously damaged. Remember I said in the 75 to 78 documents, Meier referred back to stuff from 51 that I didn't have. Now we have it. Monstrous deluges will belong evermore to the order, come back there, of the day, because through the overpopulation, the forest, wetlands, and swampy plains will become altered in function to become residential areas, whereby the wild waters of the flooding rain will find their way into the houses of the people, because they can no longer escape into uninhabited wetland areas. Landslides and avalanches, as well as earthquakes and seaquakes, as well as every kind of storms will prevail. Gales and typhoons, hurricanes and tornadoes will increase. He spells it out. Overpopulation will bear the guilt and will thereby give rise to an unnatural climate change that in only 1 decade from today, 1951, will already begin to affect the world very detrimentally. The monstrous mass and weight of the cities and villages continuously stress the inner structure of the earth more and more, through which the tectonic plates will be adversely affected, inevitably leading to increasing tectonic displacements and faults, etc., earthquakes, etc. They're warning in 51, and Meier sent this letter around to 3,000 different people around the world. And for his trouble, he got nothing in return. He, in this letter, also speaks about that these tremors will influence the entire volcanic activity on the world, so that there'll be a worldwide activity because they're interconnected. And that especially in places that are unreasonable for habitation, according to Pleyard, such as places built too closely to volcanoes or beaches by oceans, rivers, and seas, that these shorelines and these locations will be inundated by storm waves and tsunamis, and the ever-growing overpopulation will only add to the problems, which will become insoluble. Famines increase, old illnesses will return. They even say that mass tourism, along with economic refugees, we call that today illegal immigration in any country in which it takes place. They're very much against that. They say it imbalances everything. You will have strife and wars. People have to bring their own populations up to the standard of living that they would like to have, not flee into countries to try to reap the fruits of the benefits of those countries. It's not good for either party. They never learn that way, and the system breaks down. Criminal gangs from so-called third world countries will spread out. This is another result of that type of overpopulation, illegal immigration, etc. We're talking about prophecies here. There's a point to all this. He also says, as far back as 51, terrorist extremism and neo-Nazism. The rise and spread of prostitution in unbelievable forms worldwide. The children will not be spared from it. We know that today. Prostitution will turn into a respectable occupation. What state are we in? Oh, I'm sorry. It will also be designated as taxable. Well, rest my case. Televisions, already invented, will belong to every family and as well to everyday life, as will the technology of the computer, which is already being worked on diligently in America, Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union. The television and the computer will become the most important information media, however, also as significant forms for the public advertising of prostitution. This was sent around in 1951. Now, Meier didn't say that the moon was going to leave its orbit on August 12, 2003, and there's life as we know it exists yet. This is more recent, from last year. The climate warms ever faster, whereby the snowfall is also absent ever more frequently in the deeper sites, while the Earth's polar ice masses as well as the glaciers melt ever faster, which leads to this. By the year 2100, in some cases, the water of the seas will rise up to 5'3". Forceful natural changes will become unstoppable. We're going to take a break for changing of the tapes, and this is not the Budweiser Bladder Invitational, so I think, shall we say 10 minutes? Does that work? Thank you.